I'm enjoying the, the random riff that we're beginning with, because I really am fascinated by sign language, but also what's come up around musicality and embodiment. But if I was Daniel talking to Michelle, I might say, except I would say, Aspasia, what you been thinking about?
I've been thinking about actually similar to you, Seth. You sent us a message saying, sort of talking about how you'd been thinking a bit about beauty. I've been thinking about beauty a lot too. First, I was thinking about how I think often we associate it mostly with a visual kind of experience. And I was just thinking about in more of a multimodal sense, or multisensory mode, one of those. And I think, this bringing in the sign language and bringing in the reverberation of the body and all of this is a really nice link to that. I was also sort of thinking about that recent conversation, Daniel, that you had with Luke about, the unseen realm. And there's been a lot that I've been reading about and watching recently about, I guess spiritual warfare, if we call it that. But like this I'm thinking, I guess, about beauty versus something more like part of what you brought in that conversation around, the ironic, the finding yourself in situations where you are just being pulled along by dynamics that, one might say are more demonic in form, if you want, however you want to look at it. So something about kind of the differentiation here, right? The discernment. I don't know, I don't quite know how it all links together, but there's like the experience of beauty, right? There's this experience that we can have, the strike of beauty, and it has this quality to it that I was trying so hard to put into words for myself this morning, that it's definitely an apprehension, because it just sort of happens, it takes you, it's that kind of strike of beauty. But there is something about it that has like a fullness or a wholeness, or but that's not quite capturing what I'm trying to say. Sometimes people talk about like everything else stops. I don't think it's that everything else necessarily stops, but there's something about that moment where it's like, whatever this experience is, it's meeting me exactly in this moment in a way that, it interrupts something else. It interrupts the usual, I guess. And and there is, again, I don't want to say peace, because it's not necessarily peacefulness, but there's a rest, or there's a something. There's just a pause in the apprehension. And I was thinking about that experience, trying to put words to it. That made me think about all these different, all the different senses and how they can kind of come in there. But there's also something about, there's a quality to it that I always talk about as like there's a knowing. There's something about it that feels like a deep knowing. I talk about it sometimes like a remembering, but it's almost like it's not a remembering. It's not like in a moment of beauty, I remember some particular moment in my past. It's more like I don't know how to express it. It's almost like a remembering of something that is yet to occur, or something. It's like a remembering of some future possibility, not possibility, but it's like I guess people talk about like a home, or like it's like a remembering of something that is not a distinct memory of something I have yet experienced, or have experienced in the past. It's something of a future. It's got like a future quality to it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. There is something about it that feels like it meets me exactly in this moment, but there is a pulling ahead or something. A reminding of something ahead, if we put it in kind of chronological terms. So there is that kind of piece that I've been thinking about around beauty. But then there is this real interest I've had in the last sort of few months about, more of these other forces, I guess, if we call it, like, if you want to call it the demonic, whatever it is, like getting stuck in these enclosures, getting pulled along by these other forces that can trick us, right? There's like kind of this aspect to them. They can trick us. They can feel like we are being pulled along by something maybe more of the beautiful, if we put it in those terms. There's something about that I've been thinking about. And then I was also thinking about, when you're talking about irony, Daniel, And I understand this is all very piecemeal, so I apologize. But I was thinking about how that might link to the absurd, you know, like sort of the movement of the absurdists and absurdity and the non-rational move and all of that. Anyway, that's sort of part of what I've been thinking. As you can tell, very, very all over the place, but I'm in a hotel room and I've been traveling, so that's kind of where I'm at.
You're embodying the all over the placeness of your.
I am, and I'm trying to sit very still for some reason, which is a bit bizarre. It's just this all just feels strange. It's a strange setup, but it's lovely to see you both. And I would love to know, Seth, what you've been thinking.
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of overlap with the things you're already mentioning. But in particular, what I've been thinking about with beauty, I mean, first of all, whenever it was that, and I know it's thanks to O.G. Rose, but the idea of the ordering of the good, true, and the beautiful, and why, at least in the world we're living in now, that it makes sense to orient towards beauty. I mean, it's not that it never made sense before, and it's not that the good and the true have nothing to offer now, obviously. But I just love that the sense of beauty, it feels, well, the word I want to use, and it's not quite the right word, but I'll just use it and then I'll say more. It feels inarguable. And what I mean is it's inarguable to me personally when something appears beautiful to me. Now, as soon as I say, hey, look, isn't that beautiful? You could say, I don't see any beauty here. And that's, you know, the whole beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of thing. Although there are certain levels of beauty that seem almost undeniable, and you'll see an entire crowd of people, you know, like whatever, everyone stops for the street musician, and suddenly there's this enormous crowd because this person is just sort of like changing the entire atmosphere and no one misses it. Or I don't know, you walk into a restaurant and it just smells so good that everyone kind of swoons. Sure, you could have someone come from across the world who eats a different cuisine and this smell isn't pleasing to them. Sure, there's those exceptions. But in any case, for an individual, you know, I think the experience of beauty is that I'm just going about my day and then beauty arrests me. That phrase, it strikes me, and I have no choice but to be kind of, at least temporarily, you know, taken to that place. And actually you were speaking to this. You said everything else stops, Aspasia, just there, which is another thing that I've been thinking about, and I'll say more about that. But in particular, I've had this experience, and it's also come up in my reading of A Course in Miracles, as I mentioned before, which is kind of my way of exploring levels of spirituality. And when I say spirituality, I also want to say phenomenology. Like, it's a different phenomenological experience if God exists or if God doesn't exist, right? So for me, even before considering the existence of God, I was always convinced that something was real or true or a good idea because my body kind of said to me, yes, right? Like, you can convince me with really good logic, but when my body goes, ooh, I like that there's just something, I mean, maybe that's how you can also deceive me, is if you can get me to do that with my body. But there's that's something exactly very convincing. Yeah.
Exactly that. That is, and that's I think where people hear that and they think, oh, but that's like deception if you're listening to your
right.
body. It's
well,
so
the first time I had the opportunity to speak to John Vervaeke, I said something about your gut, and he just immediately was like, "Whoa, careful."
I had the same experience. I had the same experience with him. He said something about like, but emotions will just take you over, and that's just anyway.
Well, I think there's an appropriate caution there for sure. But what I want to say is that if coming back to beauty, there's an attraction. And what happens when I'm attracted? I pause. like my body changes and my attention goes towards something. I mean, that is an embodied experience. And then what I think, crucially, the thing that I've really been thinking about is what would be the opposite of that? At least language-wise, we would say something's ugly, right? It repels me. I want to get away from it. And again, it's kind of like the eye of the beholder thing, because someone says that's ugly and someone else says, what are you talking about? You know, that's my favorite painting. You're calling it ugly, but what's wrong with you? But even if we leave aside that different people see it differently, what's really interesting to me is I can see something and think it's beautiful and remember that I once thought the very same thing was ugly.
Yes.
So something about the beholder has shifted, and now I'm beholding the same thing and seeing beauty. And in the Course of Miracles, it actually describes at one point that it refers to ugliness as the veil. In other words, if you're seeing ugliness, you're not seeing. Now, again, as you mentioned, I think we often associate beauty with the visual sense, and we could just take very popular, notions of beauty. We can pick, a movie actress and say how beautiful she is, and then we can pick someone else that no one, and we can get a lot of agreement, but we also know that that's culturally conditioned. And then we know if we sit down with the person who doesn't sort of win the popularity contest, and we really get to know them when you hear their story, and then they read us a poem, it's like, oh my God, this person is incredibly beautiful. But I was so fixated on one aspect of an external surface appearance, mixed with my preconceptions and my prejudices. And I realized through experience and being with this person that what I wanted to call ugly, which was really kind of a narrowing of myself, the experience this person has opened me up, right? And we had a previous conversation. I was talking about the 4 postures of love and all of this, and I sort of threw out this idea that, well, if we don't know what to do and everything's complicated, what do we need? Just like the Beatles say, all we need is love, right? Easier said than done, but this is what a lot of the spiritual teachings point to. And the connection for me is like, well, is it easier for me to love something if I think it's beautiful or if I think it's ugly? Well, if I think it's ugly, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is beautiful and I can't see it yet, but it means I'm probably more likely to see the beauty of it the more that I sort of fall in love the object, the person, the landscape, the painting, whatever it is. It could be myself. I have some fault, that I feel like it's just ruining my life because I don't know how to, I don't know sign language like Daniel does. Daniel's more beautiful than me because he can do sign language, and I can create a whole narrative around that. But like if you talk to someone, and I'm sure Aspasia has talked to hundreds of people like this in her practice, who really is down on themselves, they'll often refer to themselves as being disgusting and repulsive. And I mean, that's not the only language, but that's one of the kinds of language. So, on the one hand, you could say, well, let's help this person, learn to speak sign language so they won't feel that way anymore. But we could also say, do they have to learn sign language to feel good about themselves? Well, what if we could teach them some other thing that they could do, and then they could see how beautiful they are because, or maybe they don't have to learn anything new to be beautiful. Like that would be another level. I just want to say someone from the Chinese tradition because I really don't know, but Bonita Roy used to have this quotation she pulled up. I think there's someone named Mipham, I want to say, like from thousands of years ago, but the quote was something like, whatever is perfectly seen is truly loved. Or maybe it's backwards. Maybe it's whatever is truly loved is finally seen. But you know how, again, someone listens to you and you say, I felt seen, I felt heard. Well, who's the person who listens to you? They're the person who's actually loving enough to do so. They might be a total stranger, so they might not love you the way your mother or your best friend loves you, but still, it's a loving thing they do to slow down and find out who are you, right? And without slowing down and finding out who you are, you may or may not have sort of surface signaling that most of the culture calls beauty, or you don't. But it's whatever form, like if we imagine that every person is beautiful, every person has, you know, like the song says, you know, their inner lights, let my light shine, or in, you know, the namaste is like the light in me sees the light in you. To do that, I think, anyway, this is I'm thinking out loud, but this is what's really interesting to me is I've had this experience, you know, of by sort of focusing on the idea of love, or focusing on the idea of, you know, if I attack my brother, I've just attacked myself. All of these kinds of things, when I follow through and I do that practice, I start seeing beauty in places I never saw it before. So that's, I guess, maybe the most succinct way I've said it. And that, like, how is it that we can, there is that devastating beauty that everyone on the street stops simultaneously and we all see it together because it's just so overwhelmingly clear. But there's more subtle forms of beauty that actually take skill to see. And then when I can see it, and there's just more beauty everywhere I look, that, you know, if I'm struggling, if there's something that's challenging, well, it's not quite as challenging if there's beauty everywhere, right? Like, you know, maybe I can't pay the rent, but man, it's just so beautiful everywhere. Or, you know, man, you know, my marriage is kind of a mess, but it's so beautiful. You know, like, this life is so beautiful. Like, there's a resilience to beauty, or at least to contacting beauty. So anyway, that's what I've been thinking about.
Can I just jump in very quickly, Daniel? I would love to hear what you have to say. But yes, there's something to like beauty moves. So what I mean by that is, I think like that example you're talking about, Seth, where, you know, people are self-disgusted, you know, like they hold on to this idea that they are disgusting, they are not beautiful. I think sometimes it operates because it is in order to preserve that these other things around me must be beautiful, you know. So it's almost a sacrificing of an ability to see one's own beauty, because that might mean something about what they come to see about, you know, the dynamics they're in, or the you know, the situation they're in, or the family of origin, or whatever the thing is, that must remain sort of beautiful. And by sort of almost by contrast, therefore, how could I be? Like, there's something to that as well. But there is this, I want to say there's something like this deeper level of beauty, and that's maybe more like the thing you're talking about, Seth, there with that devastating moment where you just can't help but it just slams you in the face. It's there. You know, I think there's something about that does, it moves, because it is personalized. And I know you're right, there are obviously situations where there is a group and everyone experiences it, but I think that they are probably still experiencing it through their own, it still meets them in some particular manner. So there's something, yeah, there's the attract and repel thing I'm finding really fascinating to think about as well. I really love that you brought those words in, because I guess what I want to say is that I definitely agree that, you know, we can take a loving stance towards anything and anyone. And in doing that, even in the most challenging situations, I think that's our best bet at being able to try and connect into what could be beautiful in any relationship or moment and all these things, and finding that. But at the same time, it just seems clearer and clearer to me that there is this other kind of force at play, or that there is something more of I don't really want to use the term evil, but something akin to that. There is something that's sort of like if we're not careful with our discernment around this, we can be led astray to thinking that we're experiencing beauty. And maybe something in certain circumstances, maybe something like the person who neglects their own beauty in order to preserve, you know, the people or the relationships around them must be the beautiful thing. Maybe that is a version of that kind of, I don't know if it's an inversion, but it's like it's being led astray. So they are thinking they're experiencing something of the beautiful by those around them, which then leads them to feel disgusted and repelled within themselves, which is, you know, when you really look at it, perhaps more down the line of, preserving a current system of functioning, which is, this flattening thing that we've talked about before, obviously. So it's just, this whole thing is really fascinating to me about how we experience that, and how to discern the difference and the levels here, like you say, the levels of intensity of that experience. Like I'm sure no matter who you are, you can probably identify different levels of this being struck by beauty. You know, there might be the moment that you hear your child laugh, right? And you know, and maybe it's also on the back of them being very unwell for a long period of time, and maybe you even think that they're not going to make it, and then you actually hear them come out the other side. You hear them laugh, you hear them have joy, you hear the vitality of their life, you know, coursing through their body. And that moment of beauty that strikes you there is something rather intense for many people. Same thing with like maybe you're just wandering along and you're struck by a painting, or you're struck by hearing a piece of music. And sometimes, and I think there's the catching being caught off guard by a person in a relationship. I loved that example, Seth. I think that's so telling. There is something about you meet someone. I mean, I feel so lucky in the work that I do, that I really do get to see. I really get to establish these relationships with people, and they really let me in to see them very deeply, and experience them in that manner. And there's just a way that the physical appearance of someone actually changes. It actually, like, to my visual system, it actually, it's not just that, like, I'm just going to use the visual as an example, but this works on any level. It's not even just that, oh, they look the same, but you know, like you can kind of see beyond that now, and actually there's this deeper beauty. The whole way you take the person in, for me anyway, changes. And there is just, you know, probably every single client, there is just this beauty that shines forth in a new way once you get to a certain place of like sort of really understanding them and attuning with them. They look different. It's just a remarkable thing. Anyway, so please, Daniel.
No, all that's very important. First, I appreciate the chance to talk. It's funny, I don't talk about sign language so much, but I often think about, you know, what exactly that did for me. And it is interesting because there are books like Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain and all that different stuff. And of course, you know, there are critiques that can be had of that. But, you know, there were a few things in sign language. First, there was this kind of real stress on memory, and like remembering the whole story. And you see, you don't really realize how good you are at kind of catching everything a person says until you try to see everything a person does. And then you're like, oh my gosh, it's really hard, but you're able to hear it, right? So you actually have to develop your eyes to see movement.
Yeah.
Like you literally have to see movement. Like if you see each individual sign, you get in trouble. Like you have to see the movement between the signs in the same way that if you hear every single individual letter, you don't hear the word. And then there's a weird way in which if you hear every individual word, you don't hear the sentence, right? And it was very interesting with sign language because you literally had to kind of, not that I ever, you know, I wouldn't say I ever achieved mastery like some individuals, but the ability to see movement, to not see individual signs and to see in that movement. Because the other thing that is critical is you also can't in sign language translate the signs into words. Like if you translate the sign language into English, you're behind. You're not keeping up. So you literally have to apprehend. And I didn't have that language then, but it's language of apprehension. That's how I experienced it as opposed to calculation. And it's very, and I would say actually language is at its best when it has this apprehensive quality. And in sign language, it's just very undeniable that you have to do that. You can't really be calculating. You have to be apprehending. It makes language more like a painting, and it also creates a sense of the possibility of meaning in movement as opposed to semantics, right? Like you capture a dance. Part of the issue is that I think when we describe beauty, you are describing something that is more like sign language than English. You're describing something that is more of meaning in movement. And there's this sense that there is something about beauty that moves. And I think that starts to point at the relationship between the demonic and beautiful, which you're also pointing at. But the first thing I just wanted to say is Yeah, it's interesting to think about sign language. I am grateful for those years, and Greg, the great teacher. I took all of, I followed him around.
How old were you when
So
you started learning, Daniel?
20, 19, 20 or so,
Wow,
maybe.
yeah.
Something like that. It's a very cool language. I sometimes wonder if education should be sign language, something like English, and then a musical language like Arabic. Like if you were to do the kind of those three types of language, I almost want to say, that are different in kind. Obviously, learning different languages in general can be very advantageous. But if you were to really like learn those different kinds of language, because obviously they're all languages, but I think the kind of language Arabic is different from the kind of language sign language is, which is different from Romance languages or French or notably English. It would be interesting to compare those. And it's, and of course, English is the language of business, as they say, right? Because it's the fastest for some, but then it's interesting to think the relationship between English and technology and the logic of capital and AI, Nick Land, and all that different stuff, right? Why is it? It would be curious to examine. It's actually an extremely curious question on why German seems to create great philosophy and humanities thinkers, why English tends to create business, technology. Not always. There's obviously many German engineers or so on, and what each language affords in different ways.
It's those long
like
German words. That's what it is. Those long German words.
Well, I would think that what German language probably does is help concepts be gestalts,
Yes.
because it's easier to combine them and to not keep them fragmented and apart,
Yes.
right? So, and I think great philosophical reasoning at its core is gestalt thinking. Whether it realizes it or not, it always comes to something like a gestalt, and that's kind of the secret, I think, of German thinking, in my opinion. So part of I guess there's a few things. So we're always already in action. And I'm thinking Blondell, but we're always already acting. We find ourselves always already thinking. We find ourselves always already in emotion. It's just like this. There's a real way in which a very, very little of our life feels chosen. We just find ourselves in something, right? We find ourselves busy. We find ourselves in an angry voice in our mind, right? Like we could say the natural state is more of this kind of just finding yourself in, you could say flows, you could say unfoldings, you could say action. And so there's an experience of life that is not, there is something about life that one experiences as almost rolling down a hill, or could be. Like there's this feeling that you're already moving, right? And when I was speaking with Luke about the demonic, we can use that language, but I talked about game theory, Kafka novels. There's a feeling like, so for example, we were just speaking on the net yesterday about what's, you can start thinking about, is the world on fire with Iran? Do I have enough food? Whatever. And I can feel myself entering into a barreling, like you're rolling down a hill, it just won't stop, right? And it feels like this certain trajectory of things. That, I think there's something about the human being that basically naturally with time goes in that direction if you don't work on it. Like you're just barreling down a hill. You're anxious about the bills, you're caught up in an angry conversation with your wife, you're nervous about the kid. You just feel yourself rolling down a hill. You're not in control in a certain way. You feel yourself just kind of going. Or a lot of the ideas you have feel like they're just absorbed from the air. It's not something you just find yourself having ideas, right? You just find yourself. And I'm not saying that there's no agency at all, but often your agency is exercised within this field of rolling down. Like it's not really freedom, it's more like free range within this momentum that's already going. Yeah, you're making choices, but you're making choices within the assumptions of what is good to do relative to what you absorb from your parents. Or, yeah, you're making choices, but it's within the nervousness that comes from feeling like the world's on fire. Yeah, you're making choices, but it comes from the self-identity you've absorbed from other people or so on, or your notion of the good, right? So on this notion of the beautiful, and it should also be noticed because basically whenever you have, so if I were to say the beautiful and the demonic are opposites, what's very interesting is opposites are isomorphically identical. They actually are the same in what they do. They just go in the different directions. So the demonic goes toward auto-cannibalism. The beauty goes toward opening up. Opening up in the sense of greater participation in the gestalt. But both of them have a feeling of a sort of losing agency. Both of them entail a loss of a feeling of agency. But the loss of agency in beauty is wonderful. The loss of agency in the demonic is actually this kind of feeling of chaos, of maelstrom, of this, I can't get myself together. I can't focus on anything. What do I do? What do I do? And you feel this loss of agency that is a torture in a certain way. There's a certain torture to it. Whereas in beautiful, the loss of agency is wonderful, right? And there's a certain feeling. What's very interesting is both of them bring a certain feeling of undeniability, because in the demonic, you feel like I'd be in denial if I act like the situation in Iran is not dangerous. I'd be in denial if I didn't accept that there was something wrong in my marriage, right? So there's a certain sort of, the demonic brings with it a feeling of don't be in denial. Like it's undeniable. It's undeniable, right? But what's interesting of beauty is it's also undeniable, but in a wonderful way. The beautiful is undeniable, but in a wonderful way. So they are isomorphic. They're structurally the same, but one of them is toward inner algebra, self-devouring, where the other goes in the direction of opening. And of course, problematically, of course, the ultimate goal of the demonic is to get you to call it beautiful, because if you do that, you're doomed. Like it's over then, right? Like if heaven equals hell, you're done, right? Like if you mix those up, and there are various ways this can occur. But what's very interesting is the strike of beauty has this feeling of a new directionality. And it's actually the creation of freedom. Because otherwise you're always already in that tumbling, right? You're already going along, and then you have that strike of freedom, you go, stop. And you're like, oh, and then you go this way. So it's not that you, in a sense, what ends up happening is you're already tumbling along. Another way to look at this and say Aristotle is you're already pursuing what you think is good. And, you know, and that's actually a problem, because your ideas of the good can be, you know, screaming at your wife or screaming at your boss or getting rid of those, atheists or something, right? Like your idea of the good actually leads you toward, and you feel like if you don't do what's good, then you're doing what's evil and you're doing what's wrong. So there's a way in which the good takes away agency, unless you want agency by being bad, but that doesn't seem right, right? So you feel there's a way in which the good traps you, if this makes any sense. Yeah. And now I want to talk, there is something here that would require more elaboration on the historical component of this, because I do think this moment of history requires a focus on the beautiful, because it's the moment of global pluralism. But to get to this moment where beauty is top, you had to go through periods of emphasis on the true and then emphasis on the good to get to this moment of beauty that then unveils always already that the beautiful was actually what you were aiming for, but you couldn't do it until you went through the historic episode of emphasizing the true. Because, for example, you wouldn't have, without that, made the technology by which global pluralism would be possible, right? And if you didn't have the ideas of the good, you also wouldn't have been motivated to do the work of bringing people together or thinking there's a good in that, right? So you had to go through all of the steps that then retrospectively shows how they're all already situated in the beautiful. Now so it's this weird thing where the beauty is the top, but then actually, in a way, the true and the good is just as important within that historical unfolding to get to that place where it unveils that beauty's at the top. Oh, and when beauty's at the top, it includes the true and the good as well, like concentric circles, right? But that all is in a historical unfolding. Happy to go more into that, but that's kind of part of it. But I completely agree that now, especially under global pluralism, beauty is central, because the good is the problem of global pluralism. Everyone has different ideas of the good. The problem in relationships is the good. People have ideas of what's good in the relations, of what's good for you to do, right? People's notions of the good are what actually cause the imprisonment, right? So this is the weird thing. The good in this way, this is the weird thing. The good serves the demonic without the beautiful, actually. Like the good is in service of the tumbling down the hill in the inability to stop without the beautiful. And so the reason, so what ends up happening in the beautiful, and I have a lot more notes over here, but I'll stop with this but the point of the feeling of the undeniability is something that needs to be pointed at, and the sharing of beauty needs to be pointed at. And this gets into how beauty is not so much, the language I want to use is beauty is not so much relative, but conditional. And it is possible for multiple people to share the same conditions and have the same strike of beauty. It seems like it's mere taste, but it's conditionality. So, for example, if you want to experience the beauty of Tolstoy, you have to meet the condition of being literate. You have to meet the condition of having the book. You have to meet the condition of focusing on. There are conditions you have to meet, right? And if you do those things and you're open to it, and you've also met the condition of having the personal experience to resonate with the characters, then it will strike you as beautiful. There are conditions. But that doesn't mean, you see, the problem with the word relative is it's as if you just on your preference decided, I like this book. Really what happens is you read Tolstoy, and because you meet the conditions, the strike of beauty happens. It's not because you chose. No, it is not at all that beauty is a thing of you just preference. It's just a preference or something. What happened is you just found it beautiful. That's also the key. Like no one, it is not really when people say, oh, that's beautiful. There's almost in that very activity a suggestion that it wasn't beautiful, actually. It's something they liked, right? When something is beautiful, it's already struck you, right? And yes, the moment of grace, exactly. So there's a strike of which occurs because of those conditions, right? The question of global pluralism is, can you increase the conditions of possibility and likelihood that the average person can meet the conditions of beauty with other people, that thus, even though they may disagree on the meaning of that beauty, the experience of the beauty itself is undeniable, and that becomes a common basis to bring people together. And that's a different thing. We may not agree on what the beauty means, but we can agree we experience beauty. Well, now we have something in common. And that's kind of the meta-modern Greg Dimber move, where it's like, even if we disagree, and that's in his work on Hello Meta-Modern, this is very important, because I think what we're actually seeing is a movement in the arts that suggests an intuition of this problem that is developing after postmodernity. Now, that's another topic, but I think it's very useful because basically, if I have a felt sense that this work is beautiful, even if I'm somehow wrong, the felt sense is still undeniable, right? Like if the felt sense is undeniable, even if what I think it means is wrong, right? So if you can get people to share that felt sense, well, now we have a common basis. And actually what you're doing there is kind of the dream of the scientific enlightenment, is if we all share facts, right? Well, we all can agree upon the facts. Well, turns out not so much, because facts are set up in worldview. What really the intuition of the dream to bring together people on facts, what it's really leaning toward is the real possibility of bringing people together on terms of undeniable felt sense. Like it's because undeniable felt sense is undeniable regardless interpretation. The problem is facts are facts within interpretation undeniably, right? Or they're irrelevant. That's the problem. Like if a fact, if it's not situated into a worldview, who cares? A rock is a rock. Well, that doesn't tell me anything, right? But a felt sense brings with it a feeling of motion, even if you don't know what it means. It's already moving you, right? And if we all felt moved together, well, then we have a shared basis of talking about what that movement means. Now, we may disagree, but also critically, if we had a felt sense, that means we care. And of course, the key to any real movement in society is that we all care. Facts, you don't necessarily care about facts out of the get-go, right? But if you're moved, you care. Well, care is established. Heideggerian care. Well, now it's actually possible to do something. So that's why bringing people together on an undeniable felt sense has a kind of leg up against everyone on terms of facts, because a felt sense automatically means there's care, right? And also, it's not going to get into stuff like the experts who decide what the facts are, IQ or whatever. Everyone can have that felt sense, right? So it becomes a new basis of commonality that opens up new doors. Now, I need to say more on the agency stuff with beauty and the demonic, and how there's this feeling of beauty being in the past, but in the future at the same time, because I think that gets into Plato and form and metageometry and stuff. But I'll stop.
Can you? Yeah, no, I'd love to hear that, and also Seth, I'd love to hear from you. I'm just bursting to say something briefly on that undeniable felt sense. This is the undeniable felt sense that I think has been sort of weaponized and, I don't know, marketed, and seems to be just everywhere. It's anxiety, right? So everything now is about anxiety, and that is a type of undeniable feeling in the body that we all experience. And, you know, we could talk about that in some depth. I do far too much, so I won't do it again now. But like that is very different. I think like that's on a different level again, and, you know, probably speaks to the veil and stuff, Seth, that you're talking about. But, you know, I think there's all this emphasis on anxiety. Anxiety is this undeniable, you know, signal in your body, and the thing that leads us to move towards is to run away. That is like that kind of we read it as repel. You know, I think we often read anxiety as disgust. Like all these things, get away, get out, bad for me, evil, can't do it, avoid, shouldn't tolerate, all these things, right? But this is just one kind of level of what we're talking about. And, you know, this links back to sort of just the way I've really broken it down recently about these sorts of levels of experiences of feelings in our body, if we call them that. You know, to me, anxiety is sort of right up on the superficial level. It's important. I don't want to minimize. It's an important one to understand and to be able to work with, and it can be debilitating if you don't. But then there underneath that is like emotions, kind of more basic emotions. And then the way I think about it is beyond that or beneath that, or however we think about it, is access to these felt senses, more like, you know, how do I experience in my body the strike of beauty? That is very different to how do I experience in my body, you know, sudden signals of anxiety, you know, or that I'm nervous. You know, they're just, I don't know how else to talk about it other than levels. And I just, you know, in lots of ways, maybe well-intentioned, I just think there's way too much emphasis on anxiety as being I guess the undeniable felt sense that we can, that we all share. And there's all these other ones, there's all these other things, you can tune into. That's all I wanted to say. So yeah, that was really interesting. I would love to hear that other stuff though, Daniel, but Seth, I'd love to hear from you.
Well, from what you're just saying there, what I think is really interesting to me is the emotions in my body that I either accept to feel or I try to not feel will impact my perception.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, if I'm in the challenging situation, and all I want to do is get out of it, I simply can't fully take in whatever it is that I'm looking at. If I kind of have some notion, even if, you know, this is challenging or I'm a little bit scared, but I have a sense of what I really want is presence, what I really, you know, and why would I want to be, I mean, if I'm really present and the situation is really dangerous, then the present thing to do would be get out of here. Like, it's not that, you know, moving away from a situation is that sometimes that's the wisest thing to do. But, you know, if it's a difficult conversation, you know, with my spouse, how exactly am I framing this? You know, it could be that there is something that's between us that I might call ugly, but I also might think that this is a beautiful relationship that, you know, and so it's like I have the potential to grasp either of those, not those two words, but either of those two frames to look through, right? And so that's one thing. And so I mean, this is a little simple, but I think that beauty and ugliness are sort of stand-ins for what's deeper, which I would say is love or fear, right? And so, and what I also wanted to bring up, you know, in regards to the demonic or the problem of difference and how do we deal with it, I think that the language of beauty and ugliness is very much, you can see it in political rhetoric, right? They're ugly, like they don't, you know, like they do these terrible things, right? Like Trump talking about immigrants eating dogs and stuff. That was sort of like, how is that supposed to land in your body? Oh my God, eating dogs, ugh, you know, like it's an appeal to the body. Or, you know, on the flip side, I'm thinking now, like, if we go with what Daniel's saying about the importance of beauty and the place that beauty can be a place where we can create a shared embodied feeling of being moved, Well, I think one of the things, I would think that the artist is incredibly well poised to draw upon all of the previous periods of history and to do, you know, like the popular word is fusion, right? But you see these artists who cross genres and people are like, oh my God, that was incredible. Or another sort of meeting of these things that was very much in the political sphere. I'm thinking of recently Bad Bunny performing at the Super Bowl, right? And he did this whole thing, which some people thought was so beautiful. And then there was the whole argument over whether it was American or not. And again, people, you know, you got the sense that like some people liked the performance and some people didn't, but like some people liked the politics that seemed to be implied and some people didn't. And then you can also imagine that there was someone who, you know, maybe doesn't like what they think the politics is, but then they actually get taken in by the performance and they go, well, maybe I need to rethink my politics. I mean, that could go in both directions. But just even the suggestion that something's beautiful or the suggestion that something is ugly begins to motivate someone in a particular way, or it's an invitation in any case. Finally, just you back at the beginning when you were talking about Aspasia, how in the presence of beauty everything stops, right? And this is another thing that I feel grateful to being in these conversations because it came up some point in the last year, but the idea of comparing clock time to eternity, right? And so I think when I'm experiencing the beautiful, right, I might be in a hurry, but I forget that I'm in a hurry because of that street musician, because of that melody, because of, you know, this beautiful person, whatever. I just sort of forget about time for a minute and I move into more of a state of eternity. And when I'm working, you know, in the arena that I work with clients, you know, a phrase that's often used is presence, or can we be in the present moment? Let's not think about the past or anticipate the future, you know, because then we're not present. But I think, you know, it's really helpful to see the present moment as being in eternity. Not because suddenly I'm living forever because I notice my breath, but it's like I'm always breathing, but when I don't notice my breath, I don't notice this ongoing thing. I mean, for the length of my life, my breath is going. You know, as I'm sitting and talking to you right now, I can hear cars outside on the street. Well, I've been in my apartment most of the day. There's been cars driving by for most of the day. So there's actually a continuity to that sound. But for a lot of time, I'm not present to the sound of the cars. As soon as I'm noticing the cars, I'm actually listening to a piece of music that, for all basic purposes, never ends because it's a busy road and there's always cars, or there's moments where there aren't cars, but that's like a rest in the music. And then, you know, rush hour happens and then there's cars and honking. Like, just where I live, there's kind of an inevitability that as long as I'm here, there will always be the sound of cars. But sometimes I don't notice that. And when I feel connected to it, even though it might not seem to be important, oh, that's that ongoing flow of the traffic outside my window. Now I'm in a different space. I'm in a different perception. I'm more, you know, to use the phrase that Daniel's been highlighting, I'm more connected to or part of the gestalt, right? And so yeah, I just think that that's really, you know, so if we use a common phrase, when do we feel really calm? When someone says, oh, don't worry, we have all the time in the world, right? And the truth is, you know, I might only have an hour, but when I come into presence and I'm in eternity, it's like, oh, I can really relax into, you know, how I would act as if I had all the time in the world. And so, you know, it's interesting because now I'm thinking like, am I connecting all the dots? I mean, one of the things about beauty is we can experience it as external, right? Like we've said several times, you're walking down the street and then you encounter something. But really, it activates something internal. I mean, I think that I feel a particular way in the presence of beauty, right? I was at a concert the other evening, and I could tell stories about it. I'll leave that for now, but I can still like remember that concert, and I remember what I really remember is how I felt. I mean, there's certain anecdotes that, because it's only a couple days ago, I can still remember and I could tell you, but in a week from now, I won't even remember those anecdotes. But what I remember is what it was like to be there, right? And it was beautiful. There was, I mean, I could say a lot of things, but I could say it was beautiful. And I was in that experience. So my memory isn't just, oh, the singer was beautiful, or it was a beautiful song. It was like I was in that experience of beauty. And I think, anyway, I just want to connect to beauty, to presence, to eternity, and to the way that when I am in a state that feels as if I have all the time in the world, that I am in a different embodiment, where I think I have a clearer perception, where I'm more likely, well, now it's circular because I said I'm more likely to see beauty, but I started with beauty getting me there. But I mean, even the circularity might be valid. I mean, because I think there is a way when I'm already opened up, you know, then someone makes, you know, some comment that you're not totally sure. Like I can lean into the part of it that's beautiful, even if like the other half was like, maybe I don't know what that meant by that, but I can see a potential here. And it doesn't necessarily mean, you know, this, so we're not talking about truth. Like I could even misinterpret, right? But there's something about, because the thing is about interpretation is often it is unnecessary. So a really useful question is like, since you don't know what's going to happen next week, are you counting on good things to happen, or are you counting on bad things to happen? Like from a rational point of view, maybe there's no good reason to predict either one, but if I have the choice, you know, I can orient this way. And so I think beauty can be an orientation as well. Anyway, I'll stop here.
It reminds me of very briefly, reminds me of, yeah, like that kind of that fullness that I was trying to allude to at the start, like when you're describing it that way, Seth, that there's something about almost, this is terrible phrasing, but you'll know what I mean. Like there's something about the amount of information that you can let in or experience or something in that moment with beauty. It's that's just unlike anything else. And I guess it speaks to the opening up, because maybe it's also just the amount that you can let out or connect to or something. It's just this, that it's like it just slams you in the face sometimes in that way, you know. And there's a fullness to it, like a if you think about like appetite, you know, like the you're so satiated like that, but in a, and it just, and this speaks to the timing thing that you're talking about there, Seth, or the pace, or the way that time changes. It's just there, and it happens, and you can just, if you can just sit in it, you know, you can just be in it, and everything, it just changes the quality of everything. Yeah. Oh, just keep saying the same thing over and over.
No, magnificent. So it is very interesting. There's a form of the undeniable felt sense that is used as a weapon. You know, this is what I feel, and if you question it, you're wrong. And it's not by chance that this moment in history that I think requires beauty has also created the personal experience that has been weaponized in various, perhaps more progressive political movements, where people take their personal experience as a kind of God, a kind of unstoppable force. But you see, if there's a weird, interesting way, like looking to a Hegel or something like that, or even kind of Christian theology, is that nothing can spread or be, you could say, successful. And I would argue that political movement has had success unless there's some truth to it. There has to be a truth to it, and that's why it's spreading, because it's proving effective in a certain way, right? And how could it be proving effective unless there's something about the emphasis on the true facts that hasn't worked? And so there's an emphasis on the good. And what you have in that political moment that some people call woke, and, you know, it just depends on, you know, that's obviously a slur by many people, but if we're looking at the truth of it, what you have there is an appeal to a move of the beautiful, but within the metaphysics of the good. And that means it must individualize, because the good individualizes. like your idea of the good and what is good, then that is what orients your movement. And what you're doing is you're calling the felt sense the good. And thus you're using the undeniable felt sense not to share with other people, but to isolate yourself. And so it worsens hikikomoriism, it worsens atomization, it worsens things like that. So that becomes a so I hit that. So there's an undeniable felt sense that needs to be used in service of the beautiful. So so this historical moment has kind of generated a kind of intuition that there's something to the undeniable felt sense that needs to be properly fitted. And the question is how we would go about doing that. Now, the other thing that's very interesting is that there's a way in which you must be moving toward what you think is good, true. Like you can't do something unless you think it is good to do. And you can't think something unless you think it's true. If you think that this is false, then you think it's true to believe that this is false, right? Like it's impossible to do something that you think is bad. Because if it could, now that doesn't mean it isn't bad, like killing someone or something like that, but you must think it's good to do that thing, right? So here's the funny thing. We're actually already set up by the very way we must be toward the world to, in a sense, not have freedom, because we have to do what is good. We have to do what we think is true, right? So we're already moving. And this is kind of a classical Aristotle, like we're already in a certain motion, right? Weirdly, the fact that we must be moving toward what we believe is true and good, and that we can then call beauty beautiful, but this is why emphasizing beauty as a strike, as a breaking in, is really, really important here, because we can call these other things the beautiful, but I think it's a misnaming. The weird thing is that the good and the true are actually potentially serving the demonic then, because you're already in this unfolding. You're already in this rolling down the hill, right? So what ends up happening is agency is found in the movement between the good, the true, and the beautiful. Like you're able to move between them. And without the beautiful breaking in here and there, you just have to keep going toward what you think is true and good. And you can't stop yourself. That's why beauty has this double move of feeling like it stops you, but it also moves you. Because you're already moving and it stops you in that motion to open up new possibilities of movement. It's kind of where you've talked about good flexibility is, where you've said with like Feldenkrais, the ability to move in any direction at a moment's notice. Without beauty, you can't do that metaphysically. Like you can't do that metaphysically. Like what you're talking about being able to do physically is what you need beauty to be able to do metaphysically. Otherwise, because what happens is when beauty strikes, it also feels like what? True and good. It brings both, right? Well, now you feel like you can go in a different direction and not betray what you thought was good and true. And this is the key. If you go in a different direction from where your good and true is directing you, okay, and you feel like what you're going toward is not good and true, then that won't feel like freedom. And in fact, you'll feel irresponsible and bad. So you'll go back to what you think is true is good. But if in the strike of beauty, it introduces a new feeling of good and true, oh, well, now it's a choice. It's a birdie and dog. Both piles of grain are equally sized. So I could go this new direction and it would not be a violation of the good and the true because the beauty introduces the good and the true. This is the reason why beauty brings this kind of confusion on it seems like the good, the true, and the beautiful are equal, right? It seems like they're equal. The reason why it has to be that way is because if the experience of beauty did not bring a feeling of good and true, then you'd feel like you'd be betraying the good and true you're always already toward and must be if you're acting in the world, and therefore you would feel wrong to do, and therefore you must go back to that true and good, right? So the beauty has to introduce a new good and true feeling if there's actually choice, if there's actually freedom, right? Because the very thing that actually takes, in a sense, the thing that makes you not free is the good and the true, because you have to already be doing what you believe is good and true. You see, it's impossible to think something you think is false. It's impossible to do something you think is not good. So in a sense, you're a slave. But that's weird because it would suggest slavery. There's this real emphasis on slavery being a result of lies and and vices, that you find freedom in the good and the true, right? Well, yes, that in regard to the historical process, there was a historical process where humanity had to free itself from the slavery of falsity by learning truth, ergo the scientific revolution, we could say. Then there was a period of gaining freedom by, and you know, it goes the other way, it doesn't matter, but the point is, then there's a period where you're freeing yourself from vice and virtue, right? And you could say that's the ethical revolution, maybe the axial age if you want, or something, right? Now we're in the age where we have to be free from good and truth, which were freedoms from vice and falsity, but they become their own slavery without the strike of beauty, without the breakthrough of the eternal through the transience, because you have to do them now. And problematically, what you have to do is that which necessarily then isolates you from otherness, because what is good for you may not be good for the other, and you struggle to negotiate, and you're trapped in your internally consistent systems, right? Like the good and the true always end up in internally consistent systems, and now you're isolated and trapped, and we have the problem of global pluralism. So what you have to do is have the strike of beauty to be free from those things that made us free in history, but now actually lead to our enclosure. So in a weird way, the good and the true at this particular time in history become demonic. But we overly identify the demonic with, say, falsity and vice, which had historical episodes, but now actually the enclosure is on the side of seeking what we believe is good and true, because that's why you're tumbling down the hill. That's where your consciousness is structuring reality towards you in an enclosure. But with the strike of beauty, that brings with it a feeling of the good and true. Now you can really feel free to do something different and not be betraying the good and the true. And critically, the experience of beauty feels like something beyond you. Oh, so it's not arbitrary. Therefore, I'm not just arbitrarily changing my mind. There's an authority here. So going in that direction is then especially justified. And it also feels like it can, and then thus it can potentially unify other people, because it's not simply an individual's own arbitrary preference. And that's where you have the possibility of bringing together a new political possibilities. But so what it's doing is beauty is taking the unfolding, and I'll throw it back here. It's taking what's already unfolding and giving the possibility of moving in a new direction. Like you could say the good and the true is an unfolding on the algebraic, that beauty then brings this new dimension and it becomes geometry. It now has a new dimensionality, but it's the same motion of the good and the true. It's the same motion of agents seeking what is good and true, but now in a new direction that is not reduced, that is a breaking in of something that's not reducible to people's ego. And the question is the following: what do we need to do to create the conditions of possibility for the average person to have that experience with other people more often than not? To the degree that that were to occur would be to the degree that people would feel a feeling of agency under global pluralism with people different from them. That would also give them a felt sense of a shared experience by which then they could go through the experimentation of that community in terms of what they want to do and what they believe in, but now they have something in common that's not reducible to any individual. Therefore, you don't have a vertical power structure and a strong man, because the beauty is the basis of the commonality as opposed to what the leader sets. And then we get to spend time unfolding that mystery, and we enjoy that mystery. And the more we unfold that mystery, the more we feel like we have agency and become more so ourselves. And then global pluralism is great because it enables that condition and it gives it more and more dimensionality. I do have more notes here, but I'll stop.
We have to deepen people's experience of their body and their physiology beyond anxiety and some of the basic emotions. I think we're just really stuck there, yeah. Well, I mean, just what you're talking about there, just it reminds me again of, you know, the surprise. You're talking about the surprise element, you know, that is it's the felt experience that catches you off guard, but very different to an anxiety. And you know, these are experiences that a person just must feel. It's an experiential endeavor. You know, we can talk about it all day long with someone, but if we can't help to give people the experience of that,
yes,
then who cares? Who cares? And then we just sound like we're preaching, and we're talking down to people, and we know something that they don't, and, you know, and that's just creates barriers. So it is you know, it's all these, there's so many practices that are in the service of this, of trying to help people to enter into an experience of something physiologically that their normal way of being in the world every day keeps them at a distance from. And you know, this, what you were just saying there too, Daniel, was something I had jotted down at the start as well, this idea that the strike of beauty, part of that experience is the experience of, it comes from elsewhere. Like, you know, it's not my partner telling me what they see as the truth, or, you know, like it's not from another authority that is just, you know, the human other. It's not from a self-help book that I'm reading. It's not the therapist or the philosopher, or like, you know, it is that experience of, wow, something just came and reached in through all these usual barriers and sort of like noise that surrounds me in my everyday. Something reached in through that for a moment, pierced through and met me here, and I'm having this experience. And it's not my partner, and it's not the teacher, it's not, you know, it's not the politician. It's I don't know what it is. I don't know, but there is an experience of it that is different when you tune into it. It's very different to, again, something like maybe more like a hedonistic kind of like thrill, or, you know, it's because that, you know, is you, like, I don't know how to phrase this now, but that, you know, is like kind of just like your, it's coming from this more of a, I guess, a selfish place. Like it's being generated by something more of a you. Whereas there is something about beauty, the felt sense of it is that it is being given to you. Like it is something that is coming from elsewhere, but it's not coming from an other. It's not coming from what I would call an authority of that kind. I guess, you know, a human, whatever. I can't, the words are failing. But, you know, even as I say that out loud, for me, I'm quite comfortable with that, but I can imagine how even hearing that for someone who is not comfortable to hear about the idea that, you know, there is some other kind of elsewhere that may be able to pierce through your usual way of being, that might be the barrier. That's like, no, I do not want that. That sounds frightening, or yeah, like a distrust, or even just a complete rejection that would exist. And yet, you know, there is, again, I just think all of that needs to be taken into account when we are thinking about how do we help to create contexts where we can be, you know, facilitating the chances of someone experiencing this kind of thing. There is so much variation in the way that people have walls up against that. And so it does mean that there's not just one solution to that there needs to be many. And yeah, Seth, feel free to jump in. I'll keep percolating away.
Well, one thing that occurs to me about the idea of the strike of beauty, and this is zooming out, so it doesn't only apply to the strike of beauty, but the strike of beauty is a moment when I encounter something that, sure, I'll call it beautiful, but I could also say, I didn't expect that, or I've never experienced that before. Or even if it's, you know, a beautiful piece of music and there's some other beautiful pieces of music in that genre and I can compare it, it's still there's something unique. There's something. And so like I'm thinking now John Vervaeke, because he'll often use this example. He'll say, you're looking at a tree, but then you're saying, I didn't know that tree could be like this, right? It's like, so I've seen a tree before, but this tree, you know, I think he's talking about the strike of beauty as well. And so there's something that happens that recalibrates my entire experience. Now, of course, I could say, I've never seen anything so horrible before. And I could have an experience like that, and that could also recalibrate me. So I want to underline that I'm going to a more zoomed out, more general place where, but beauty shares this among the other things we're saying. Part of how it functions is it just presents me with something that I hadn't previously experienced. And Daniel made the point about hikikomorism, right? So if I'm a hikikomori, I'm trying to not have new experiences. I'm trying to only have a certain kind of experience. And, maybe I've gone out in the world and had bad experiences. And so I'm just trying to stay safe. I'm just trying to, maybe I even think this is the good life, because out there in, the big bad world, things happen that interrupt the good life. But if I have an experience that is, whether or not I wanted to expand my world, certain experiences just do expand my world. I mean, it could be just reading the news. Oh my God, I didn't think that would happen, and now this war is unfolded. That's not beautiful. But it's funny. This is just almost a random thought, but I the other day, the YouTube algorithm right at the top of what it was showing me was something like Iranian classical music. I was like, why is it showing me this right now? That's really interesting. I didn't have time to click on it, but I could have clicked on it and discovered that there was some beautiful genre of music that I'm unfamiliar with, and I could find myself saying, well, why are we bombing these people? I mean,
I'm getting Persian jazz. So there you go. We're in a similar. We've got a similar algorithm there.
We could switch to talking about AI and the algorithm and the weird shit that goes on, but I mean, the thing is, you can't. I also feel like there's something. I mean, beauty doesn't. I'm thinking of. What's the case? The last name is actually love, but the first integrated marriage in the United States, white man and a black woman, and I think their last name was Love or Lover or something like this. It was pretty poignant. But I mean, what happens? They live in the context of racial segregation, but they fall in love, right? It's just like, well, that's pretty inconvenient, but the fact is, I find that when this woman is around of a different race than me, that my body wants to be close and I want to talk to her, and all of this stuff happens, right? And I think that the more that we find ourselves being neighbors with someone who was born on the other side of the world or practices a different religion, it's hard to not notice, if I see them day in and day out, that there's a lot of beauty in this person. Now, I could notice that my neighbor does funny things that I would never do. Sure, I could notice that. But, the more time I spend with them, the more I have the opportunity to appreciate, and I could hold on to, they do that one funny thing that I don't do, and I could make that the entirety of who they are. But if I get to know this person enough where I see a range of things that they do, if I get courageous enough to invite them over for dinner, and maybe I find out that what I served them was inappropriate, but then I invite them over a second time, and I do it in a way where they feel more comfortable, and like, oh, well, this is how they are when they're comfortable. Oh, now they're telling me this story. Oh my gosh, it turns out that the story they tell me about where they grew up across the world has all of these similarities to my childhood, which I never could have expected. Suddenly I'm seeing something different. But the strike of beauty, and again, I want to say there could be the strike of disaster, the strike of something, the atrocity, which also does this in a different direction. So I don't want to leave that out of the conversation. But the strike of beauty could simply get me to pay attention for the first time to something that I wasn't going to pay attention to. Yeah.
No, well, I think again, kind of isomorphic, the strike of the disaster, the strike of the horror, and the strike of beauty they're going to have this structural similarity. What is interesting, though, is almost in a kind of grace redemption narrative, is how often the strike of horror can actually be folded, the death on the cross can be folded into a beauty, right? Like it can be brought into it. Not necessarily, of course, but that's interesting. I think everything you would say. So I think one of the issues, like you mentioned, the halftime show, a lot of, you could even say, the postmodern critique of beauty on, taste and text and all that other stuff is kind of responding to a world where I almost want to say there's an over centralization on certain potential sources of beauty, because we don't have vibrant enough social environments to have our own individual experience of beauty. So we want Tolstoy to be beautiful for everyone. We want Bad Bunny to be beautiful for everyone. When really what we need is almost, in a sense, more decentralized, localized social environments where people can have their own strikes of beauty. And then you have a lot of those, where people can individually have those to know it's possible, and it's almost rhizomatic, as opposed to let's show everyone the same halftime show, hope they find it beautiful, and that will be the shared felt experience. The problem is, at that large of a scale, the probability that everyone seeing the halftime show meets the conditions, not taste, conditions of experiencing it as beautiful is very low. However, the likelihood that a given person meets some conditions for some phenomenon to be beautiful to them, to thus be evidence in their experience of it, of the possibility of a strike of beauty that is a universal possibility for all people in their unique personality conditions, is much higher, right? So how do you create more vibrant social individual encounters, right? Well, with the loss of the middle and the churches and the communal markets and different things, it becomes more difficult. But this is, again, where I think the social coordination mechanism is a very big deal, because now it is possible to talk with people on the other side of the world of different religions that you don't know what you're going to talk about. You don't have to have the intention of going over to India and see. So you can have, let me put it this way. It is now possible to bump into someone in India while they're in India. That was never possible in history, where you could bump into someone in another part of the world. Like if you were going to bump into someone, it was someone in Virginia down the street. You could bump into someone at your local farmer's market, bump into someone in your locality. But the issue is they probably weren't that diverse if they lived in your area. That's just how, those things go with selection. But now it is literally possible to have basically bump in encounters with anyone on planet Earth, thanks to this technology, right? Bump in encounters are the ones where there's a higher probability of beauty because there's less preset complexes. Like they're more robust, surprising environments. It was not possible to have robust, surprising environments that were truly diverse in history until the social coordination mechanism. Because the key to robust social environments is the bumping into, the encounter without intention, the encounter without reason even. Because here's another key. If I go to India to meet people in India, I have a reason to do so, and my reason can be deconstructed. Like as a good reason, maybe it's I'm leaving out other parts of the nation. Maybe that's just because I have a personal preference to go to India versus another country, Brazil or something like that. So you can deconstruct my reasons and my intentions as being truly about pluralism and diversity and say, no, that's just your preference, right? In order to not be deconstructible, I have to somehow encounter difference without reason, which the logistical demands of the past made that impossible. You can't just stumble onto a plane to go to India to meet people in India, right? Oh, and if they got on a plane and came over here, then they may not reflect the average person in India. They may reflect the person who's able to get on a plane and come to a university in America or something, right? Like, how are you going to bump into someone? Well, now it is possible if we create the robust, yeah, that's exactly, it's a fun game. Like you're able to have conversations with people and you don't know what you're going to say. You can enter into spaces online because of this YouTube Zoom combination allows robust social environments with people around the world while they stay around the world in their difference to then bump into each other. And here's the key. That is also a decentralized effort of strikes of beauty. And that's what we need is, in a sense, you need lots of little small decentralized spaces where individuals can encounter their own strike of beauty, because the probability of the people in those smaller experiences meeting the conditions to have that strike of beauty are far higher than everyone having the the halftime show. And then when they do that, you then have a special bond with the people with which you did that with, and you know that experience is possible. That's the key. Oh, this experience is possible. Well, if this experience is possible, then could it be possible with other people? And could that bring a new kind of basis of interaction? Well, you know it's possible. So it's like we said at the net, you know, I think Seth or, you know, we were talking about with Christian and everyone, like just having the experience in your life of actually being listened to is rare. Many people have never had the experience of truly being listened to. If the one thing this social coordination mechanism space did is offer people the experience of actually being listened to and unlocking what that would bring out of them, that's a major deal, right? Well, likewise, I think most people on planet Earth, this is terrible to say, I'm not sure if the strike of beauty is something everyone has had. I think like in that real deep mystical sense, I'm not sure. What a world would you be in if you at least did the work to lay the infrastructure to create the conditions of possibility to increase the probability that the average person had that experience? How would they think about economics differently? How would they think about religion differently? How would they think about politics differently? Hard to say, right? Because whenever you have those cultural shifts, it changes how people think about everything. After you have the axial age, the way people think about politics is different. After the scientific revolution, the way people think about economics and politics is different, right? Whenever you have these cultural paradigmatic changes afforded by new infrastructure and institutions and stuff like that, it changes how people think about all of those different fields, right? Well, if everyone had the experience of actually being listened to and actually engaging in a long form dialogue that actually felt like a meaningful conversation, and if they had the surprise of the strike of beauty with people in diversity, that may radically change how people think about politics and economics and their own marriages and everything, right? So that is now possible. And because it is possible for people in diversity while staying in their diversity to create social spaces where they can bump into one another that creates the possibility of that strike of beauty. And then that's an undeniable felt feeling. And basically the point I would say is if we do not do that work, basically because an undeniable felt sense is the only way, in a way, it is ultimately what the exhaustion of the good and the true lead to. Once the good and the true have exhausted their role, then people are going to go to an undeniable felt sense. Well, they're either going to use it in service of their own individualism, which will be demonic, their own take on things. It will go in a hikikomori way, or it's going to somehow be used in service of relationships. And therefore the gestalt, therefore the whole. Well, there are things we can do to increase the probability it goes in the direction of the relationships infrastructurally, technologically, and in our own choices of how we use our free time to model that alternative. And I think that's part of the work today. Now, again, there's more to be said on the gestalt and beauty as agency and the unfolding and stuff, but I'll stop there.
It's in our body. I'm just going to say the same thing. It's our body. Like our body is an instrument, and people are being taught to be, and people are just, you know, developing in such a way that this happens. I get it. People are, well, it's different, can be almost completely cut off from their body, can be even just consciously aware that they are scared of feeling things in their body. They don't like it. And so look for ways to minimize feeling of all kinds in their body. You know, and there's obviously very important reasons for some of that too. I don't want to suggest that I am belittling why that comes about. It's just, you know, my experience working with people has been that we are capable of feeling so much more in our body than we have any idea that we could be. And, you know, again, this is that move again, where like everything we're talking about sort of interrelationally, it's also happening inside, you know, this whole like beauty is in the direction of opening up, you know, relationally. And it's the same thing, like in order to experience that felt sense, that resonance of beauty, to allow it to be able to pierce through and find you, in terms of its potency and maybe its frequency and whatever, there is an opening up to an expansiveness internally as well, in terms of the spaciousness of feeling our body, and the different intensity of feeling that can go on there, and variety of feeling that can go on there. And you know, anxiety really is it is a big issue. And but it is but one layer. It really is but one part of what you can feel. And there's stuff you can do to work on anxiety in order to be able to then, you know, have deeper connection to all these other forms of feeling in the body. And I think often we learn instead to be scared of our feeling body, and that we should be seeking calm in our sort of feeling states in our body. And yeah, there's just so much I could say on that. But it is an expansiveness inside, and it is a deepening of it's incredible what you learn about yourself too. Like, it really is that when you can open up to just how much you can feel, and just how much you can tune into, and just what your body is capable of, and just what you can hold and experience, without it leading to impulsive action and all these things. And you know, as I say all that, I hear that how that relates to that experience of fullness when beauty does strike in that more majestic, sudden, deep manner. It's sort of a preparation, I guess, this kind of experiencing into and exploring our body's ability to feel, and deepening all of that, and going beyond just anxiety, and choosing not to accept that anxiety is all there is to it, and all these things. That is almost like a training ground, I guess, for preparing the instrument, or however you want to think of it, so that when whatever it is that decides to strike you in that moment with beauty, it can be you can receive it more fully. You can have that that felt sense that makes it so undeniable. And there is just briefly too. I always hear this piece in these conversations for me around like variety, I guess, like the expectation that there will be diversity, there will be variety, there will be difference. You know, to me that is, well, not always. It's not always, obviously, but to me that is a beautiful thing. That is lovely, and can be challenging, and can be jarring, and can be anxiety provoking, and all those things, but it's both at once. It doesn't mean just because it's jarring and anxiety provoking and all these things that it's bad and I should reject it and push it away. I don't want a world full of people that are just carbon copies of me. That would be horrendous. You know, people just go round and round in circles and they're talking, if that was the case. So, you know, I just, I don't know, there's something here about when, I don't know how else to explain it. When I'm out in the world walking around, there is an expectation, I guess, somewhere on some level for me that that I want to encounter things. Like I want to experience things that might catch me off guard or be surprising. Obviously not always, and dependent on other levels of stress and all these things, you know, don't want to romanticize it. But there is an openness to that as well in all of this. And again, that is to the idea that I could be surprised at any moment. And also internally, the openness to the diversity, the variety of ways that I can feel different signals that might show up, my confusion on like a logical level about what does that mean? Why is that showing up now? All of that, there's a wonder, I guess, a wondering and a kind of like a posture of wonder in all of this that I think I'm engaging in a fair chunk of the time, not always, depends on other things going on. And so, you know, I think even helping people to open up to those sorts of postures, I know that's a word you use, Seth, and I really like that. Because that's what it is. It's a whole body stance. It's a posture. And you know, I think those things are important too. So I can understand those pieces of the puzzle coming into play here, building those in also alongside then, you know, they're building blocks towards, I guess, this idea that we can come up with ways to help people experientially have these different understandings within themselves of what it is to feel different kinds of feelings and what it means to let them in and what it means. Yeah, anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking in a similar direction about what I'm anticipating. So when you talk about the posture of wonder, I almost imagine that the posture of wonder is something that you can have before you encounter something wondrous. Mm-hmm. It's just that you believe, like you say, I can understand from my life experience that there is diversity out beyond my door. But before I go out the door, how do I anticipate my experience of that diversity? And that's really, I mean, of course, there can be particular experiences that shape me, but it's ultimately a belief that I have. And, you know, belief generally is not a thing I describe as a belief. My beliefs are generally things I describe as knowledge. The world is like this. But actually, I believe that the world is like this. But for my own phenomenological experience, because that belief has just become so foundational for me, I take it as the way it is, whereas it's actually just my belief. And I mean, so if we talk about the meaning crisis, using John Vervaeke's language, or we talk about nihilism, and I feel like, you know, one of the reasons that John Vervaeke really resonated for me is when I first encountered that series, The Awakening from the Meaning Crisis, and he was describing everything, I thought, oh yeah, you're describing my experience. And I think part of nihilism is the expectation that there isn't very much beauty. You know, and it can even be that I encounter beauty, you know, I go out and I don't know, I take a trip somewhere or I go to a concert, but then when the concert is over, I immediately could have this feeling of scarcity. Like, oh, you know, just that one time that the artist comes to my town and they won't come for 2 more years and nothing else. I mean, I'm exaggerating it to make the point, but whereas if I have, so to use again religious language, if I have sort of faith that there's beauty to be encountered all over the place. I mean, it's funny, you know, I referred to earlier the idea that I'm exploring, you know, spirituality. I'm exploring these ideas, which practically means like I'm reading text that is making, you could even say, assertions about how the world is, but then I'm going out and trying on those assertions phenomenologically. And I mean, what's most convincing to me is if trying on these beliefs actually allows me to experience more beauty. When that happens, I'm like, well, the more I experience beauty, the more resilient I feel, and the more, you know, like, so it's funny because I almost want to say I'm not really trying to figure out if what the text says is true or not. What I'm saying is this text might give me access to more beauty. And I already know that, you know, people could argue all day long about if this text or that other holy text is the one that we ought to be referring to. But, you know, in my own experience, if this text opens me up more. But to sort of to rewind again, when I was young, I think I was very nihilistic. And I had no religion was one thing, but when I tell the story of my upbringing, the phrase that now pops out, and it's just become a cliche in my storytelling because I've said it so many times, but it felt true. And so that's why I adopted the phrase. And what I'll say is when I was young, music was my religion, right? And what I mean is when I felt crappy, the one reliable thing is I can go to my room and put the stereo on. And what I would often do is turn the lights out too, so that the entire experience would be that song or, you know, whatever. And then the first time I ever went to a concert, you know, for my favorite band. And then there was all these other young people bouncing around and just as excited as I am when they finally take the stage and everything. It was like, oh, it's not just me, right? And so that was this experience of sharing. When I was at the concert the other night with my partner, most of the people there were younger. And I said to her, I haven't been around this many people younger than me at one time. You know, it's just like a few thousand people there, or however many it was. It was pretty sizable venue. And I suddenly saw these young people enjoying themselves and, you know, got a little window, just like the people next to me talking. And it was like, oh, you know, I mean, kind of cliche, but like the generation gap, right? But I felt like just this teeny bit of bridging the generation gap, because we all love the same artist, you know, and she's on the stage and singing, and I'm looking around at these other people. I'm like, oh, okay. You know, so it's opening me up. And I just think that, yeah, I was really appreciating how you were zooming in on the body. Like just, I already said this, but like in that moment when I don't know if you hear these sirens coming through my window.
Yeah, a strike of a kind.
Yeah. Or I was thinking, like, you know, kind of a classic situation. A man sees a beautiful woman, right? What does he do? Well, what he might do is get really nervous, right? And what I think about that is like, you know, like when I was young and I was single and I didn't want to be single, and most of the time I wasn't encountering the person who I wanted, you know, potentially to be my girlfriend. Then when I saw her, it's like, oh, don't mess this up. There was immediately this fear, because there was this scarcity. It was like, oh, this one moment. So like now I have to suddenly be really cool. And I didn't know I was going to need to be really cool, because I didn't know that this pretty girl was going to be in the room. And then she is, and I'm wearing the wrong shirts, and like I can't think of what to say. You know, whereas if I thought, I'll meet someone, it's going to happen eventually, and I was sort of relaxed about it, then in the same situation I could have, but in either way the body is very involved. But it's there's something about the belief, either like this is my only chance, or like, oh, beautiful, like, you know, this, let's see what happens, you know, could be another. But so there's something about beauty. It expands us. It can also, we can contract in the face of beauty if I think I'm going to lose this.
Yeah.
And just one last thing. Yeah, you said this, I think, Aspasia, that beauty expands us, and when we're expanded, we can take more in, right? So we're living in the world, we're living in the time of overwhelm. We had a previous discussion about that. Daniel, I can't remember which conversation you were in recently, but I heard you talking about, like, I think this is when you were talking to, anyway, a recent podcast, you'll remember it, but you were saying, when I take in a lot, then I have a lot to say, but then if I never get to say it, that can show up as anger, because it's just like, I want to express something. It could even be that I'm not feeling articulate, but I want to try out saying what I think. I often feel like I'm doing that with the two of you, like, oh, thanks for letting me try this. but you know, when you let me try it out, you know, whether I sort of hit upon something that I felt great about saying, or if I just feel like, well, I thought out loud for a while, I do release something, you know. And so if beauty gives me more capacity to deal with overwhelm, again, that's a connection to agency that I think is very important. Yeah,
absolutely.
Apparently, I had a lot to say about that.
Yeah, but oh, I feel like that all the time in these conversations, Seth. I'm just bumbling around with my words, trying desperately to put words to something going on. But you know, that's also why I appreciate you both so much. That is why that is part of the experience of the beauty in these conversations for me, is just knowing that it's a place where I'm open to do that.
Right. Like I was just there, I was a little self-conscious, and as soon as you said that, I thought, oh, it's all right, you know. So this is very important, actually.
Always all right. Yeah. Always all right here. I think that's what makes this such a I look forward to these so much for that. and you know, this agony of this terror of, but I might only experience it once, or you know, this is another barrier I come up against as well in the therapy room. People, you know, again, some people are able to acknowledge, I know there's this whole other way of being I could be in the world, like if I just let these certain things in, but I don't know that I want to. Like, it's the genuine confrontation with the idea that what if I finally allow myself to feel something more deeply like a beauty or a love, or you know, and what if then I lose that thing? And that's like the agony of that, the idea of the agony of that, or that people have experienced something like that in the past, you know, the breakdown of a very important relationship in their life in a very painful, unexpected way, that they can't make sense of. And that's it. I'm never doing that again. You know, like I am never opening myself up to that again. Because the idea of the scarcity, I think that is so key in all of this. And there's something about the chasing of beauty and the wanting to own it and the possessiveness of it, and the, you know, where this can all go awry. And that faith is so important. And also just something about, and again, this is, you know, as you get to experience, I guess, beauty more and more, the experience of it from a position of like knowing it's not yours. I don't know how else to explain it. It's not yours to own and hold on to. It's kind of it's a grace. It's a gift, and it's sort of being given to me in that moment. And you know, sometimes it hangs around for longer than others, and there are kinds of moments like that sort of reside within my body and my memory in a way that's very different, that I can sort of draw upon and remember and sort of almost re-experience in some way, never quite the same way. But then there are some that are not like that, and it is more of a fleeting moment, if we call it that. It doesn't feel fleeting in the moment, but in terms of normal time, it's a fleeting moment. And I don't know, like a knowing, it's a deeper knowing that those moments will continue to come. Like there's just a faith in that, and it's not about the holding on to. It's about just the kind of being receptive to when they arrive, whatever they are and however they arrive to you. And I don't know, I somehow have faith and a trust in the way that washes over me or becomes part of me in some manner, and that's enough. I don't really, this is a hard one for me to put into words, but yeah, of course, there are those moments where you have a strike of beauty, and there might be the actual thought, I just want this to go forever. Like I just want to hold on to this like forever. But to me, that's not how beauty operates, I guess is what I'm trying to say. That is just not how it operates. And in the trying to hang on to it and put it in a jar and keep it, and all these things, that is the thing that destroys it. And like it's, you know, it's that kind of thing that I'm trying to refer to. There is a mystery to it, and it's the best I can do, I guess it goes back to the conditions thing. The best I can do is just be working on, if I want to experience that, often if I can, there's kind of a setting the conditions that I can do within myself, within relationships, trying to help others as well, with all of that. That's sort of the best I can do. I'm sort of powerless to the point of being able to will a strike of beauty to occur, beyond just setting conditions and waiting. And there is, the faith is really important. There is something about the handing over how all of this works to some other force that I trust and believe in, that makes this bearable. Bearable is not the right word, but I guess increases my willingness to be open to all of this, or something of that nature. And without that, I do understand why people are terrified at the prospect or not interested, or if they do experience it, you know, start to experience it for the first time, maybe are wanting to hold on. And yeah, so I do understand all those things. But there are, it's just, I don't know. It's just, if you allow it, it can work on you in that moment, and it may just be a brief moment, right? But the way it can work on you, the potency, all of that, the way it can work on you in that moment can be of a magnitude and a degree and an intensity that is beyond maybe even just 10 years of being completely closed off to it, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's all I'll say.
Excellent. So first, information intake needs to be adequately proportioned to processing, or we blow up. We go into anger. And you could argue that we've mainly been using the internet for information intake, but we need to use it as we're using it for social coordination, because that's where the internet is proving to be a major problem, because the information intake side of it has not been adequately proportioned with the processing necessary, so it doesn't just blow up in rage or overwhelm or stuff like that. And you see also critically, there is a danger in information intake without capacities of articulation and language and speaking and nervous system regulation, because then that very information creates something inside of you that cannot be supplemented, that cannot be brought out. And so it's just going to actually learning becomes isolating. Like there's this long history of the ideas that like philosophy makes you isolated and alone. Learning, enlightenment, like being, genius or whatever, just leads to a world where nobody understands you. Yeah, because if you don't learn in proportion to that learning capacities of articulation or processing, then yeah, it isolates you. And so that's why one has to be careful to suggest learning is a virtue or information is a virtue. It can actually contribute to carrying a lot inside of you that makes you feel isolated, even if you're around other people. So that's why learning is not necessarily a virtue if it is not matched with abilities to share it and relate in that learning. And I think this technology actually, as a social coordination mechanism, actually allows the possibility to properly proportion learning with processing, which has not happened before. And that opens doors, because there is something about that processing that then actually, in a mysterious way, puts learning in service of training of the body. Because when I process my information in speech, then I actually feel emotions. I'm listening to the other person. I actually do train my body when I speak about what I learn. I actually move the learning into service of the body training. The training of the mind and the training of the body go together as one and the same, always, already, as they always were. And so that's really important. Furthermore, the learning gives me a reason to speak with other people. It gives me things to bring up. Like you were talking about, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say. Where learning can give you something to say, and shared learning can do that, right? It helps you actually know what to say, right? But then also learn what not to say and in what way and all of those different things, right? So learning then comes with systems of training, processing, and articulation. Learning then comes to actually serve these problems as opposed to perhaps making them worse. And that's an important innovation for our moment. Beauty is 100% involved with the body. The true and the good can be more the mind, but but beauty requires the entire body. And what's one of the great kind of ways that history works is our focus on the good and the true, which were more in the mental realm. Now, I'd have to justify that claim, but if you granted me here, led us to creating a world of global pluralism via technology and the internet and all of these things that now really requires a focus on the body. And yet how we got here was through a certain disregard of the body. So now there's kind of an irony where you have to go against the spirit of what got you to this moment. And also critically, that is actually a place where beauty tends to operate in paradox, and beauty tends to operate in this kind of flip moment, this kind of backwards moment, and agency tends to operate there. Agency tends to develop when you go against the spirit of the thing that got you to this place where you can go against that spirit. Like good and true, like agency develops here where our focus on the good and the true, if you will, got us to this place where we need to kind of focus on the beautiful, which there's a kind of paradox in that, but that's actually where agency develops, because you're not just tumbling along with what came before. There's a strike of something that changes the direction. And so that's where actually, in that sense, something paradoxical or even contradiction, as the Germans mean it, actually is why agency develops there, because there's something contradictory about the idea that the good and the true as historical movements would lead you to a place where you need to move beyond them, per se, or focus on the beautiful, where a focus on the mind led you to a place of focusing on the body. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, but if you do it, and well, that's right, it doesn't make any sense. You have to experience it. You have to put your body in it to get it, right? But then, of course, if you've just been using your mind, that's a nonsensical thought. Well, if it's nonsensical, then it's freedom, because it's not just going to be reason that does it. It's going to be you that does it. To do something nonsensical means you have to do it, not just your reason or your good ideas. It's thus agency. It's thus non-rational. So beauty is absolutely primarily conditioned by the body, by the fullness of the body. That is also why a focus on defining beauty by propositions, or what is beauty, is problematic, because then it's mental. It's a propositional thing, right? And we've been spending a lot of time in certain intellectual traditions of trying to define beauty propositionally, which is going to therefore confuse the good and the beautiful and the true. You're going to be confusing it. It is necessarily experiential. And it is experienced according to the conditions of the body. Now, I think I will also say a little bit on why beauty increases agency and why it has. So, let's say you're a husband who's taking care of your kids, and it's therefore good to take care of your kids. And it is true that they are your kids, and it's true that it's responsible, and it's true that you need food, right? And so you're thinking about all you need to do to make money, and you're just thinking about all those thoughts, and you're in your head. But you're in your head for good reasons, because you care, right? But then, like I'm saying, you're tumbling down the hill, right? There's this notion of tumbling down the hill, and you're overwhelmed, and look at the world, and prices are going up, and how are we going to figure that out? And if I don't think about these thoughts, I don't care about my children. So there's a certain circular problem here. If I just say, well, I don't care about the food, well, that's not good, because you need to care about feeding your kids. But then weirdly, concern about feeding your kids can lead to this craziness in your mind where you're worried and anxious, right? But there seems to be an impasse, because if you give up the source of the anxiety, you're not taking care of your kids, which is bad, right? So the very notion of what's good to do has you trapped in your anxiety, right? Or could, right? And what ends up happening, though, is when you have that moment of then seeing the kid smiling and playing, and you've done the work in your body to actually let the emotion of that experience happen, then you're able to actually get out of your head. And here's the key: that's good and true too. Okay? So you now have the good and true of feeding your kids matched with the good and true of the joy of your kids. And so now there's freedom, because I can choose between them. And that's why this idea, what presence is, when people emphasize presence, in my opinion, very often what they're talking about is the agency that arises when now you have multiple grains, piles of grain for the birdie and donkey. When you create a bothness that actually then frees you from the good and true that has you in the anxiety of your head, you're now free to actually embrace the moment with them. And because it is beautiful, then that actually has more weight than what's going on here, right? And this change, so you're already moving, you're already toward taking care of your family, and now you can be toward taking care of your family in the beauty of the present experience with them as they're having a beautiful day, right? And you don't have to betray your care for your children to get out of your head, right? See, that's the key problem. Without the beautiful, the only way to get out of the anxiety caused by your care for your kids is to, in a sense, give up your care for your kids, which means you're trapped, right? Unless you're just a bad person. But the strike of beauty actually is able to free you without giving up your care and responsibility, right? And then you're able to come back to thinking about, then you can return, here's the key, you can return to thinking about how to feed them, knowing you have to do so in a manner that doesn't forget being present. So you're able to return to that real problem, but in your mind in a way that keeps you from feeling like you can't stop yourself and you're anxious and you're going on. So you're able to return to solving the problem of how to feed them, but without the feeling of tumbling, right? And that's why beauty has this double move of a movement, but then a stopping, because it's able to stop the tumbling in your head with the anxiety while moving you into a deeper experience of reality. You see how this is that's that breaking of eternity into the temporal, right? So it has this double movement of stopping and moving you in a new way. And the ability of you to have that experience is all worked in the body. The likelihood that your children can do that strike of beauty to you is tied to your nervous system regulation, to your ability not to yell at them, to the relationship you've had with them, with the emotional maturity you had. And if you haven't done that work in your body, then you're not going to be able to have that present strike of beauty with them. And thus you're damned to the anxiety in your head that's a result of your very care for them. And so then the good and the true and love actually become a source of trouble. But then and this is the demonic move, but wouldn't you say it's beautiful for a father to take care of their kids? Isn't it beautiful for a father to feed their children? Yes, but no, it depends. It depends. It's not beautiful if it's in that demonic force pulling you along that you can't stop. It's beautiful to the degree that it entails the strike of beauty, to the degree that going to the responsibility of taking your kids remembers those moments of presence that make you have agency and freedom in that activity, which you're only going to have to the degree that you've done certain works in your body. And so what's also happening in this moment of the strike of beauty is another way to look at this, which would be the larger topic, is that reality either unfolds toward autocannibalism. It either goes into a certain enclosure, a shrinking. So reality is always moving. Okay. And it's like there's a motion that's always occurring. There's always time, and time is more real than space. We've talked about that. So time is either going in the direction of this, it's closing, or time is going in the direction of this. And what happens in the strike of beauty is you're having this simultaneous remembering of something you never experienced. What you're remembering is that reality is doing this. You're remembering that reality has a form, to use that loaded Platonic term. And you also, the reason why it feels like it involves the future is because you remember that that thing from the past is also going to be occurring in the future. That same motion of either going gestalt opening or autocannibalism, that's going to be occurring in all moments of all of time. And what happens is we forget the movement of reality because we get in our mind, and so we forget it. And then you have these moments of remembering, oh, there's this movement of reality I'm supposed to align with. And I'm supposed to have been always aligned with it. And I keep forgetting I forget. Like I keep forgetting that I forget this thing. And you remember that you're supposed to remember. And then 5 minutes later, you forget again. And then you remember and you go, I forgot again. And that's actually all work in the body, not mentally, because your brain is the thing forgetting it forgets. So it can't be in the brain. It has to be in the body primarily. Remembering primarily has to be in the body, because if you forget, you also forget you forget, and therefore it can't. So your body reminds your mind of what it forgot. And it does so by moments of presence that allows you to have the strike of beauty that makes your brain go, you forgot again. You forgot about this unfolding that is part of reality itself. And in forgetting that, you went toward the autocannibalistic enclosure. Oh, right, I'm supposed to remember this. And there's a certain feeling of faith to it, because, of course, you're having faith in that feeling that you have in reality itself. Mm-hmm. That could be called God, obviously, the gestalt, all of these different things, the geometry, the time space, this unfolding, right? So you remember in that moment, right, this thing's got me. I don't have to do it all, per se. Like there is actually, like, I don't have to do it all. And in fact, when I do it all, and here's kind of like the proof of this. When I do it all, I necessarily have to do it according to the true and the good. And the true and the good necessarily enclose. So if I actually do it all, then I'm doomed, because the good and the true are the relativizing principle that leads to a self-consistent logic that dooms me. So if I do it all, I'm doomed. Oh, I forgot that again. Oh, right, I need to remember that there's actually a reality in which strikes of beauty are possible that actually keep me from eating myself. Right, I have to remember that, because I can take care of my kids all day long, and if I do it in the direction of autocannibalism, it will not matter. So I have to, and it is only because strikes of beauty are possible that we can be reminded of what we forgot, and therefore get realignment. And the work is to not forget that thing that you have these glimmers of that will be true in the future, just like it was in the past, just like it was now. And basically life consists of a whole lot of constant work to keep remembering what you know, that you can't mentally do exclusively, because your brain will forget it forgot when it does and then won't know it forgot anything, and has to be regularly kept in the body. Emotions are tied to the intuition you forgot again. Emotions are tied to the energy needed to get the brain back on track. Doing the work in the body is tied very much to the ability to feel that presence that's going to pull you out of the tumbling down the hill that's going toward auto-cannibalism. And if you don't do that work, then you get pulled along, and that's the demonic. The demonic is that pulling you along, and you can't stop it, you can't stop it, you can't stop it. Well, you can't stop it because you keep forgetting that you forgot you can. And you need those strikes of beauty to remember you can, but that's all done in the work in the body. To the degree that we can create a world of which the average person would have access to spaces by which they can process the information that is going through their heads due to the internet, and thus do work on the body, and also then be inspired to do in real life interactions with people that would be further body work, and then also to be introduced to people that would, say, be talking and modeling those things, would be to the degree that we increase the probability that the average person would therefore in their life have experiences of the strike of beauty that would remind them of what they forgot, of which would entail the agency necessary so that we unfold, align with the Gestalt, as opposed to collapse toward an auto-cannibalism, of which is ultimately a form of demonic damnation and enclosure. And so the work of the social coordination mechanism is basically tilling the ground so that the average person may be afforded that possibility in a world that needs it.
Yeah. One of my favorite phrases from when I was very young is from Heraclitus, and it's, "The thunderbolt steers the course of all things." And and like in that phrase, to me, like the thunderbolt is kind of the divine beauty. There is something, you know, and when you were talking there about kind of the manner of movement of beauty, and that it's both a kind of an arresting and a movement. I don't know, I just thought about the thunderbolt, like I thought about the lightning, you know, the shape of it, and it's, yeah, that was just, yeah, that was beautiful. That was beautiful, the way, yeah, you brought that together. Stunning, lovely. That's all I got, Seth.
Yeah, well, no, I really appreciated that whole thing you just shared there, Daniel. And what I was putting it together with was something Aspasia said earlier about working with a client, and they actually allow the feeling to move. And then she said they look different afterwards, right? And it's interesting. I mean, even just with the thunderbolt, I don't know if this is true in all traditions, but you know, just metaphorically speaking, beauty is often just associated with light, right? Which is also associated with understanding, versus darkness could be, you know, something demonic, but it could also just be ignorance and not seeing, not right. But what you were speaking about, Daniel, there, I was imagining, like, if we think about the, you know, the highly realized monk, or like when I was in Virginia with you and on the net, we were talking about these monks who walked across the country recently who really had this impact on people. And I do think there's something, you know, I mean, if I had the right kind of rigor and scholarly background, I would at least go looking for studies to back up what I'm going to say. I don't have that, but I think there's something that intuitively feels correct to me based on my experience. Is and I can even think of the two of you as an example, but others, you know, who are working with the social coordination mechanism, the liminal web, or who are like, think of a person who is taking a lot in, but is allowing it to move through, right? Who actually is regulating, let's not say perfectly, but rather well. And then do they have a kind of a shine to them,
Yes.
And I mean, so I'm thinking of what Aspasia says, how does that client look after they have allowed energy to pass through that previously couldn't pass? But also, I mean, even if it's just somewhat subjective, who is the person that others want to be around? It's the person who has taken in all this information, which for me, I found overwhelming, but you seem to have processed it to a higher degree than me. So I want to spend time around you because, you know, and I mean, even if shine is now just like a phrase that I'm using to describe an attraction, but I actually, you know, in my experience, you know, when I think of a good friend of mine who I've always thought had a quote unquote sunny disposition, and she always seemed to see the best in other people, and she seemed to be cheerful. There is a place where the metaphor and, you know, my experience of her, including visually, is kind of like there is a little more, almost I want to say like luminescence around her, you know. So like, I don't want to say this is a rule, and this is why I say, like, I don't know if there is studies, you know, to show this, but you know, I mean, I think, I mean, I'm sure there's studies that if you're in a good mood versus not in a good mood, that you have different physiology, right? And I'm sure that there's ways that this shows up on the surface of the skin. I mean, I can't speak to this exactly, but there is a way that, like, I mean, something I think about is we can talk about openness in terms of I have an open mind or I have an open heart, but I always imagine along with that, like, more openness of the pores of my skin. Like I'm more willing to allow things to come in. I'm less defended. And if there is some sort of internal light in me, then that openness is also going to allow for more emanation outwards, right? Not to say that I myself have more light than anyone else, but if we all had an equal amount of light inside of us, if we want to just use this metaphor, the one who shines the brightest is the one who allows more transmission through the boundary. Both I allow it to come in because I'm not afraid that I won't be able to process it, because I'm willing to experience, you know, someone who's angry or in grief, and I'm willing to take that in. But also, you know, like the vulnerability of I'm willing to tell my story, or I'm willing to, you know, struggle to put these things into words. And then, yeah, the conductor of light. Or when I was speaking with Bonita Roy, who has a really strong orientation towards, you know, the non-human world, towards nature, and how she would often say, you know, certain people, you could encounter them in the middle of the city, but you feel like you just had the experience of being in nature, right? Because they're this kind of, like, they understand themselves as part of nature, like human nature in that sense. Don't look out the window and that's nature outside the window. It's like, no, anyway, this is getting into Bonita's ideas, but again, I think there is something about a transmission, right? And just one last thing, just to resonate with one other thing, going back to the Course of Miracles, it has a lot of language like, when you give, you receive. And when you give, like, especially if you give an idea, you don't lose it. You're not poorer because you gave the idea away. In fact, you know, someone else has it. Or there's other passages in the text where it's talking about light, and it says, you know, you leave a shine, you know, that others experience, but you're not less bright for having shared it, right? So again, this speaks to this kind of mystery of how energy can be created, this intrinsic motivation, this way that we can talk, and as we've been doing for over 2 hours, and still feel animated, right? Because there's something that happens through that. So to me, I mean, I said this earlier, it's really impactful for me when I can make it phenomenological, when I can make it somatic, or when I can visualize it. So, I mean, even this idea of light and emanating light, if I walk around and imagine everyone emanating light, even if I know that it's just an imaginal game I'm playing, it somehow changes my physiology to a place where it's easier for me to imagine this person is loving, imagine they have good intentions. And when I imagine all of that, well, my nervous system is very different than when I imagine that they're out to, swindle me and all of those kinds of things. So, yeah, I think I just really appreciate this idea, which was fresh for me in this conversation, that the capacity to process the energy, including the overwhelming quality that we're all facing, to let it pass through you, that also liberates the shine to some degree. And I mean, it definitely takes practice. And like, if I go to, I go across the world, I go to Asia. I've never been to Asia. Well, I don't doubt that I'm going to be confronted with all kinds of difficulties for me. But I'm also exposing myself to all this new information. If I go there and come back, even if it's kind of a bumpy ride for me, I imagine it's like that trains me to process a kind of information I never processed before. Of course, I could have a bad experience and be traumatized, and it's not like it's guaranteed to go well for me, but potentially, if I could have that new experience, and I could also notice, I mean, here's the last thing I'll say. The thing about overwhelm is it usually follows a crescendo, right? This is a lot. Wow, this is really a lot. Oh my God, this is getting to be an extreme amount. Oh my God, I'm overwhelmed, right? But if I can see that I'm getting overwhelmed, I can hopefully, I mean, not true in every situation, but I can hopefully say this is my limit. I'm stopping here. I'll come back tomorrow. And that's even just that kind of titration, rather than like to use the scenario that Daniel was talking about before. I got to feed my kids. I got to feed my kids. I got to feed my kids. It's also like I can't ever get off the train. Like I can't ever get off the merry-go-round. Because like it's an emergency. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm fed up, but I can't stop, because if I stop, and it's like sometimes I have to stop even when I think I can't stop. But then that's where the faith comes in. I can stop if actually the universe might take care of things while I take a nap, Yep.
And the thing about light too that I love is that like light can sneak in through cracks. So, that's kind of the unexpected and the surprise and the piercing and the so, if we let it, if we're on the lookout for it, light can also sort of expose to us these hidden structures that we are behind, if you think about it like that, but by noticing it's coming through a crack, it's like, well, there is something about it that illuminates that which would otherwise remain invisible because it stays in the dark, or, because again, therapy bias, but I'm just thinking about, so many of these barriers and self-enclosures that we all build up for ourselves, and all these things are unconscious, more unconscious in nature. And actually it's being on the lookout for these strikes of beauty, these cracks where the light enters. It's unexpected, it can be inconvenient, it can be all those things, but they can I think maybe part of what they're able to do, or maybe even why they turn up in that moment, is to, if you want to, expose something of the self-enclosing structure that you find yourself in that moment. That is, it's all of that. And light is a beautiful analogy for all of this. And I just think there's just nothing like that imagery of a dark night sky, and just the way that lightning, a lightning bolt illuminates it, and the shape of it. And I just think it ties beautifully into everything we've been talking about today. Thank you both for your light and for being here. It's always majestic. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having us, Aspasia.
Of course.
Lastly, say quickly is that the SCM, the social coordination mechanism, is training processing that is adequate for the information overwhelm that we have today in global pluralism, and that basically all of our institutions, which are means of processing and education, are inadequate. They do not create enough of a living ecosystem for it. There is a strong correlation between processing and shine. And so basically what we are trying to do is to increase the ability of people to process and therefore shine. Shine is how you deal with global pluralism, because different shines and it attracts you in and it is beautiful and you want to be around it, and it creates energy to sustain people in the encounter with difference so that they actually experience it as beautiful as opposed to overwhelm with and thus create a harmony and so on and so forth. And I do like conducting as a word of lightning is certainly more of a way to associate beauty. Lightning conducts, conductor also music, that the lightning and music and these things go together in important ways. We also basically, what is important is that human capacities are non-zero sum versus zero sum, meaning I can gain the benefits of it and you can as well, and everyone can, and we can do it together and be on the same page, and also be unified by that shared experience of light. And again, we simply have not had a mechanism of the coordination and spread of non-zero sumness based on human capacities that is adequate to compete with the movement of capital and economics through the pricing mechanism. And therefore, we are overly habituated by the logic of capital into how we approach the world, when that should simply be one tool in the toolkit of how we can think of reality. But that would require a infrastructure that allows the other ways to think about reality to be just as much on display and accessible to the average person, which is what the social coordination mechanism affords. And if that is not done, then we will be basically slaves of the good and the true, if you will. We'll be forced to follow those directions, which will lead us in the direction of enclosure. And the final thing I'll just say is, to the degree that we successfully processing in the way we are describing it is the work needed to participate in the unfolding of reality this way versus that way. When you don't process, you go inward in auto-cannibalism. Like when you can't process, what does that mean? Because processing doesn't, processing doesn't mean you don't hold. That's the problem. People are holding a whole lot, right? And they can't process it. So what does it do? It weighs them down and they go inward. So processing is not the same as holding. And the problem is everyone is holding a whole lot inside of them because of the internet, because of the world. And hikimorism is a very rational strategy in a world where you find yourself holding a lot and can't process it. You're trying to cut down as much entering you, right? So if you're in a world where you find yourself holding a lot and you can't process it, either hikimorism or rage, it's going to come out in rage, and we're seeing that all around the world in many forms, right? Processing, to the degree that the average person can process what they are experiencing, is directly correlated with to the degree they will unfold with reality toward the gestalt into its fullness. And there's no neutral ground. There's no neutral ground. You're either going toward auto-cannibalism and enclosure, or you're going this way. So the necessity to spread the infrastructure of processing as the SCM does is truly an important matter for us all.
Yeah, we're moving, whether we like it or not. Yeah, we're moving. It's like, what direction are we moving?
Yes.
Lovely. So nice to see you both. Thank you both.
Always good to see you both.
Have a beautiful
night. See you both. You too. Real treat. Best to you now.
Daniel, you're cutting off your head with your camera there.
Yeah.
I know.
Hold on.
I can't even tell what's going on over here. I mean,
now you cut your sound off.
Yeah.
He's trying to bring up the subject of disablement. He always likes to talk about it, and he's just.
Yeah, we see your subconscious moves.
Yeah, you figured it out, Seth. Seth knew. He figured it out so quickly.
I'm actually really jealous of Daniel. That is one life skill that I think would be awesome. I think American Sign Language would be a really cool thing. I mean, obviously you can communicate with people who don't, have regular speech, but also like you can communicate without making a sound. Like you can send signals.
I think one of the things I do appreciate about sign language is coming to experience language visually. And also, I think what's very important is sign language is not English translated into sign. It has its own grammar. It has its own structure. So where I might say today was a good day, In sign language, you would say something like today, good. You would not say today was a good day or something, right? Like you would just say today, good. And how it's just very interesting how that kind of structures your experience very differently. And to have an experience of language, how in art there's always show, don't tell. Well, it's really interesting how in sign language, showing and telling are the same thing, and how it's kind of an experience. I think it would actually be very interesting. I never wrote the paper. To kind of go through like Derrida or Leo Strauss, all of these different people who are doing structuralism and their theories of language, and actually to look at it through sign language as opposed to linguistics. And now
Daniel,
that would kind of be. It's actually funny though, because a lot of times sign language gets associated with music. Like there's a unique musicality and poetry to it. And a lot of those languages are stressed for their musicality. So it's kind of interesting that as you move, I have no solid thoughts on it, but as you move to a language that is so radically visual, weirdly, it becomes like music again. When you would think that it would be the least musical, it almost feels like conducting all of a sudden, or it does feel like there is something about sign language that almost innately feels more poetic and musical, which maybe is just my own bias reading into it.
Reminds me too
But it would be very interesting.
Yeah, that reminds me too
Please.
though, of just languages where there's more playfulness that's available, like in the ordering of adjectives and all these things. Like I think about Greek in that respect, like there is more playfulness available just in the way, in some ways, that you go about ordering that, like words in a sentence, as opposed to, I think English can be quite locked down compared to other languages in that respect. So there is a playfulness component too, which I guess links to the poetic.
What I was going to say that's interesting with sign language. So if I were to go what, or if I were to go what, like I can't say that. So it instead, where in language I go what or what, in sign language I go or, and so there is an innate acting in sign language. And in fact, people who do sign language very well, they do definitely seem like actors. And there is something about acting where because there's something
Well, it uses the whole body,
ASL,
doesn't it? It uses the whole body.
It
Yeah.
uses the whole body. Yeah, that's correct. The table just fell. It's the wind. We're doomed. But it's so there's something in sign language too about telling stories. So if where you're expected to kind of act to make it fun. I think there's a real emphasis on storytelling in sign language. So if I were to just do a quick something where if I were to go, I walked, to work, and I saw some people I knew, but, I could do that differently where I said, where you say it so clearly, these are people I'm not too happy to see, right? Like, and I saw, versus, and so there's so you're supposed to kind of make the context of sign language, acting more than tonal, which I think is really wonderful, because I think actually language is way more fun if people when they're speaking act anyway. If there's more of a spirit of acting in any form of use of language is more fun, but that's definitely present in sign language. There's also fun signs as well. Not that we have to talk about this today, but I love the sign seriously, where you do something like this and you go like, right. So I can
like
go, yeah. So it's really fun because you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to go like your eyes kind of furrowy, like seriously. Or you can go like weird. Weird is a cool sign. Weird. So it's like a W when you go weird. So you're kind of like, or you can be like you can do your hand different, like it's a different kind of weird. So you'd be like, oh, or
I love it
that
because
kind of
it's like
thing.
you enter, it's that thing. I mean, it's like someone who is expressively speaking, English. You enter into imagining what they must be thinking and feeling to be using their whole body in that way, and to be making the facial expressions that they're making. And it's just amazing how much richer that is as an experience, as the listener, as the receiver of that. Versus just sort of the reading. Yeah.
I think it definitely, I would say that those 2 years of sign language definitely had an impact to make me in a phenomenological direction. It definitely had an impact on the creative writing and fiction. It definitely made me think of the experience of seeing language and trying to close the gap between reading the word water and the experience of water.
Yeah.
Like it kind of points in the direction of, can you make the word water wet, as Beckett said Joyce wanted to do. I would say my experience of sign language definitely went in that direction.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that. I think you're very expressive when you speak, Daniel, and I mean that may have been partly how you were before sign language. I don't know, but I could see how that could contribute to. One of the coolest stories I ever heard, there was this woman, a family friend, who did grant writing. And so she was in some sort of meeting that was a proposal for, we want to do something, and part of what we wanted to do was we want to build a building. So there was a proposal about some architecture, and they had sign language translators. And what the family friend described is that they're doing the signs but they are literally mapping the proposed building in space. Right? They're drawing a picture that is improvised based on what's being said. And then she said the kicker was, halfway through the long meeting, one of the interpreters is tired, and so the other one comes to fill it in, and they just continue with the drawing that has already been created in the air, so that their level of attention and attunement, and then even just the fact of like, if I draw this square, it's different for me to draw it than for you to see me drawing it from over there. Like they would have had to flip it. But she said, I was just listening to the English spoken language to understand, but she says, as far as I could tell, there was a seamless transition when the second sign language interpreter came in. And then just the other day, I was in the park and I saw two women walking through the park and talking with each other and signing, but it was just struck me that when you walk with a friend, as I was also doing that day, you're for the most part looking forward. It's like, the driver and the passenger, and you talk, but you're looking. And so they turned to each other, but only partially. It was like they were walking and they were seeing where they were going. And I was just like, well, I'm pretty hands-free when I walk down the trail and talk but for, just the complexity of what they were doing, both walking and talking, I just really appreciated it. So, yeah, it's.
I was just going to say very briefly, when you said hands-free, that reminds me of what I find so frustrating about trying to have an engaged conversation one-on-one with someone if I'm holding my phone. What I find so frustrating is that I can't use my hands. Like I have to put it down. There's just something, that's probably.
Where you see someone on the phone and they're going.
Yeah. That's the only way to talk on the phone, I will say. Right. Sign language or not, that's the only way to do it.
But it could be that even the musicality of the tonality that goes through the phone is enriched because you're actually acting it out.
Absolutely.
Or this is kind of a further riff, but when I was in my Feldenkrais training, and so it's all about embodiment, we had a teacher there, and she was this guest teacher, not our normal trainer, and she came in, but she was just so joyful. And in Feldenkrais, one of the things that we always come back to, the joke in the training is, you can ask any question that you want, but there'll only be one of two answers. The first answer will be, it depends. And the second answer is going to be the pelvis.
I thought it was going to be Feldenkrais. I thought the second answer was Feldenkrais.
Well, the pelvis is at the center of your body, right? And most modern people who sit around and look at screens too much or whatever else they do just don't have a lot of awareness of the center and of the hip joints. If you're a martial artist, you have that. But anyway, so one of the famous Feldenkrais processes is called the pelvic clock, and you learn to aim your pelvis at all 12 hours of the clock. And it's like a level of specificity of use of the hip joints that most people never really explore. But if you just explore it, it refreshes so much. And it's not just refreshing the muscles and the joints, it's my conception of my body and how it works. And so a lot of stuff happens. Anyway, that's all sort of the background. But anyway, just this trainer was sitting and speaking to us. And I just noticed I mean, if you can sort of imagine the pelvis is like a bowl, I'm wanting to show it with my hands rather than stand up and show my pelvis to the camera right now. But
why not?
she would, yeah.
It's just the internet.
Yeah.
When she would laugh, she was sitting in the chair, but every time she would laugh, her pelvis would do that. She was rocking on the chair, like her whole body was just like, you know, whereas like a lot of people laugh, but it's all up here and it's kind of a nervous thing. So it was just her body reverberated with the laughter in this sort of undulation that was just very natural. I just do homemade made up sign language, and then like people don't
knows what you just said there.
You know, people get louder with their sign language. They try to sound louder.
Emphasis, you know? Emphasis.
My ex-wife had sort of improvised sign language that she would do with me, and she would always be like, "How could you not understand?" Because she would do this whole miming routine. I would just be like,
that was quite something.
The camera fell off, so that was pretty great.
I thought you were just
so did
showcasing.
you see the fairy lights we added? I
Oh,
think I
that's
showed them last
amazing.
time. So
Yeah.
oh, they're really great. They were throwing them away at Sam's. Now the camera's broke, but that's fine. We all saw
Fairy
them.
lights make everything better. Every
They do. They really do. The fluorescent lights sucked. I just got home from work and